I spent 7 years building a company that never saw my value, until the day they fired me on my vacation, right before everything they relied on started falling apart, and I realized losing my job wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my real life. Snow in Aspen doesn't fall quietly. It drapes everything in a soft kind of silence that makes you forget your phone even exists. That was the idea anyway. That was why I came here. I, Sophie Mitchell, had not taken a real break in years. Not a real one. The kind where your brain stops calculating deadlines even when your eyes are closed. The kind where your body isn't just out of office, but actually out of survival mode. My first morning in Aspen, I remember standing by the large glass window of the cabin, holding a mug of coffee I barely tasted. The mountains outside looked untouched, like the world had paused just long enough for me to catch my breath. My phone, of course, did not agree. It vibrated on the counter like it was angry at me. Maya had texted again. "Turn it off, Soph, I mean it. If they can't survive without you for 5 days, that's their problem, not yours." I stared at her message for a long moment. Maya always spoke like that, sharp, simple, brutally honest. She knew the version of me that existed before burnout turned into a personality trait. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my therapist's email again. It was still there, unread in parts I already knew by heart. "You are exhibiting classic burnout indicators: emotional detachment, chronic fatigue, and hyper-responsibility. If you do not disconnect, your body will eventually force you to." I had laughed when she said it in session, a dry, defensive laugh, the kind people use when they don't want to believe the truth. That laugh didn't come easily anymore. I decided to go skiing that afternoon, trying to prove something to myself I couldn't name. The air was sharp, almost violent against my skin, but it felt honest in a way nothing at Northbridge ever did. For 2 hours, I let gravity decide things instead of emails. And then my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Almost. Daniel Brooks, my boss. Something in my chest tightened immediately, like my body already knew what my mind hadn't accepted yet. I stepped aside from the slope, gloves trembling slightly as I answered. "Sophie," his voice snapped through the line without greeting. "Do you have any idea what time it is in New York?" "It's my approved vacation," I said carefully, breath visible in the cold air. "A vacation," he repeated like the word offended him. "During prep week, you think this is acceptable? After everything we're dealing with?" I closed my eyes. Snow crunched under passing skiers. "Daniel, my leave was approved weeks ago." There was a pause, not silence, calculation. Then he said it. "You're done, effective immediately. This level of irresponsibility is exactly why you're not leadership material." For a second, I didn't respond. The wind felt louder than his voice. "You're firing me," I finally said slowly, like I needed to confirm reality. "Yes," he snapped. "Consider this a professional consequence." Something strange happened then. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the snow, phone pressed to my ear, and realized I had been afraid of this man for far too long. "Understood," I said quietly. Then I ended the call. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was wide, like a door had just opened somewhere I hadn't noticed before. I looked back at the mountain, at people still skiing like nothing had changed. But everything had. And for the first time in years, I didn't immediately reach for damage control. I just stood still, breathing, no longer employed, no longer apologizing, just present. The call ended, but the sound of Daniel Brooks's voice didn't disappear right away. It lingered in the cold Aspen air like static stuck between reality and disbelief. I stood there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, even though the line was already dead. But I didn't cry. That surprised me the most. Instead, something stranger happened. Lightness. Not happiness, not relief exactly. More like a sudden absence of pressure I didn't realize had been crushing me for years. Around me, people kept skiing down the slope, laughing, falling, getting back up. Life continued as if nothing had shifted. But inside me, everything had already changed direction. Back at the cabin that evening, I met Maya Collins in person. She had flown in unexpectedly after sensing something was wrong. Maya was in her early 30s, short, sharp-eyed, with dark curly hair always tied in a messy bun as if she never had time to fully arrive anywhere. She worked as a freelance designer and carried a restless energy, like she had already survived one life she never talked about. People trusted her instantly, but few ever truly knew her. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You got fired, didn't you?" I nodded, and she didn't say, "I told you so." She just exhaled slowly and handed me a bottle of water. "Good," she said quietly. "Now you can finally breathe." That night, after Maya fell asleep on the couch wrapped in a blanket too small for her, I sat alone at the wooden table near the window. The mountains outside were black silhouettes against a fading sky. I hadn't written anything personal in over 2 years. My life had become reports, emails, strategy decks, and crisis responses. Nothing belonged to me anymore, not even my thoughts. I found an old notebook buried in my suitcase. The cover was slightly bent, like it had been waiting for a version of me I no longer recognized. I opened it anyway, and I wrote, "I don't know who I am outside of work." The pen stopped. My hand trembled slightly, not from sadness but from recognition. It was the first honest sentence I had written in years. I kept going. Every decision I've made was filtered through what Daniel would think, or the company, or the clients. I don't remember choosing anything just because I wanted it. A silence filled the room, not empty but exposing. I realized something I had avoided for years. I wasn't just overworked. I had been slowly replaced by a version of myself designed for approval. Later, I opened my laptop, expecting panic, expecting damage control instincts to kick in. But there were no urgent emails, no new instructions, no one needed me. And for the first time, I asked myself a question without fear attached to it. If I am not Sophie the employee, then who am I? Outside, snow began to fall again, covering everything in silence that felt almost respectful. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. I just listened, and stayed there. Not as someone trying to fix her life, but someone realizing she might finally get to start one. The morning after I wrote in the journal, Aspen felt different. Not softer, sharper. As if the world had stopped comforting me and started observing me instead. Maya insisted I leave the cabin for a while. "You're spiraling inward," she said, tying her boots. "Go outside before you turn into your thoughts." That's how I ended up at the High Ridge Corporate Leadership Summit, hosted inside a glass-walled resort overlooking the snowy valley. Executives in tailored coats moved through the lobby like they owned the oxygen. I didn't belong there anymore. Or at least, I thought I didn't. The registration desk was managed by a tall woman named Clara Jennings, mid-40s, platinum blonde hair pulled into a strict bun. Her posture was perfect in a way that felt trained, not natural. She spoke politely, but her eyes scanned people like she had once been punished for missing details. "Name?" she asked me. "Sophie Mitchell." A brief pause, a flicker of recognition that she quickly buried. "Former Northbridge Analytics," she said quietly, not as a question. I nodded. She handed me a badge without further comment. Inside the main hall, I tried to stay invisible. But that changed when a small incident occurred. A junior analyst from another firm struggled to answer a client logistics question during a breakout session. Without thinking, I stepped in. I corrected the workflow structure in under a minute. Then I left. I didn't notice him at first, but he noticed me. Michael Reeves stood near the glass wall at the far end of the hall. Early 40s, tall, lean, with salt and pepper hair and a calm posture that didn't match the noisy room. His suit was dark charcoal, simple, expensive in a quiet way. His face carried no arrogance, only calculation, like he was constantly reading outcomes before they happened. He was CEO of Summit Core Solutions, Northbridge's biggest competitor, and he had been watching me. Later, I found him again near the outdoor terrace. Snow drifted lightly behind him as he spoke with 2 investors, but his attention kept shifting toward me. When the others left, he walked over. "You corrected their entire system in under 60 seconds, he said. His voice was calm, measured. "I wasn't trying to," I replied. A faint smile appeared. Not warm, interested. I've seen Northbridge lose efficiency for years, he said. Now I understand why. I frowned. Why? Because they let you go. The words hit strangely, too precise to feel like flattery. I turned to leave, but he spoke again. You don't look like someone who was just fired. I stopped. For the first time, I looked directly at him. And what does someone like that look like? I asked. He tilted his head slightly. Smaller, he said. Angrier. More broken. A pause. You look like someone who just became dangerous. I didn't answer, because something in me didn't reject the statement. It questioned it. And that was worse. The flight back to New York felt shorter than it should have. Not because I was eager to return, but because my mind had stopped measuring time the usual way. Everything since Aspen felt like I was watching my own life from slightly outside my body. When I stepped out of JFK, the city hit me immediately. Noise, motion, urgency. New York never paused for anyone, not even for people whose lives had just been dismantled. My phone lit up before I even reached the taxi line. 17 missed emails, 9 missed calls, and 1 message from an unknown internal number. We need you back, urgently. That wasn't possible. I had been fired. Or at least that's what I thought. At Northbridge headquarters, I met Ethan Cole, a junior analyst barely out of his 20s. He was thin, pale, with messy brown hair and permanent dark circles under his eyes, like sleep was something he had heard about but never experienced. His voice cracked slightly when he saw me. Sophie, thank God. He looked like he had been running on fear alone. They're not responding to clients, he said quickly. The new workflow system collapsed. No one understands the transition layer you built. I didn't get a transition team, I said quietly. He swallowed. Yeah, we noticed. Inside the office, chaos wasn't loud. It was organized confusion trying to pretend it still had control. Screens flashed error logs. People spoke over each other. Someone was crying in a conference room but trying to keep it quiet. And then I saw the emails. Client escalation. Urgent. Service breach notification. Immediate review required. One stood out. A major institutional client had written, If Sophie Mitchell is no longer overseeing this account, we require immediate clarification on continuity or we will terminate partnership. My stomach tightened. They didn't care about the company, they cared about me. That was the moment I understood something dangerous, not powerful, dangerous. A voice cut through the room. Interesting. Daniel Brooks stood near the glass office wall, arms crossed, expression controlled in a way that felt rehearsed. But his eyes were not calm. They were strained, like someone holding a door shut against a storm. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I just didn't shrink anymore. You came back, he said. I didn't, I replied. I was called back. A few employees turned away immediately. No one wanted to witness this. Daniel stepped closer. You know what's happening here? He said quietly. They're collapsing without structure, and you were the structure. I said nothing. Then his tone changed, sharper. They're blaming me, he said. Board, clients, everyone, because you weren't here to hold things together. A pause. And then the sentence he chose carefully. You abandoned your responsibilities. That word, abandoned, landed differently now. Not as accusation, but as projection. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said calmly. You removed a system and expected it to function anyway. His jaw tightened. For the first time, Daniel didn't look like a CEO. He looked like someone realizing the building he stood in was never as solid as he believed. And I wasn't inside it anymore. I was outside, watching it crack. The atmosphere at Northbridge didn't just feel unstable anymore. It felt defensive, like the entire company had shifted from building value to protecting itself from collapse. I was sitting in a small conference room on the 32nd floor when the first official email arrived. Human Resources, Legal Compliance Division. The subject line alone felt like a warning shot. Inside, the message was cold, structured, and carefully worded. They referenced my non-compete agreement, confidentiality clauses, an immediate requirement to hand over all operational knowledge, client mappings, and internal frameworks. Not a request, a directive. A woman entered the room shortly after. She introduced herself as Laura Bennett, a corporate attorney assigned to oversee the transition. Laura was in her late 30s, tall and sharply dressed in a charcoal suit that looked more like armor than clothing. Her blonde hair was pinned back tightly, not a strand out of place. She spoke with controlled precision, the kind of voice that had learned to survive boardrooms full of men who interrupted too often. "Northbridge is expecting full cooperation," she said, placing a folder in front of me. "Legally, they believe your departure does not absolve your obligations." I looked at her. "And practically?" "Practically," she admitted, lowering her voice slightly. "They're afraid of what you know." That was the first crack in her professionalism. Outside the glass walls of the building, the city moved normally. Inside, everything felt like a containment strategy. Later that evening, I met Maya Collins again. She arrived without warning, leaning against my apartment doorway in a worn leather jacket, her curly hair damp from rain. She looked exhausted, but not surprised by any of this. "They're trying to bury you in paperwork," she said immediately. "How did you—" "I still have friends inside compliance teams," she interrupted. "Not everyone at Northbridge agrees with Daniel." Her tone was sharper than usual, protective. Then she added quietly, "I'm on your side, whatever happens." That surprised me more than the legal threat. That night, while reviewing internal logs Maya had discreetly forwarded, I found something buried deep in archived operational reports. A discrepancy. A major client system failure had occurred months before my termination. Daniel had signed off on a rushed patch without informing the operations team, and then he let the blame drift, slowly, carefully, until it had somewhere convenient to land. On me. I leaned back from my laptop, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was controlled narrative. A pattern. And now that the system was exposed, it wasn't trying to fix itself. It was trying to silence the person who could prove it. The email arrived at 6:42 a.m., long before New York had fully woken up. I was still sitting at my kitchen table, the same laptop open in front of me, the glow of the screen reflecting off untouched coffee. Sender, Michael Reeves, CEO, Summit Core Solutions. No subject line, just a single sentence. "We should talk, officially this time." It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a pivot point. An hour later, I was inside a private video conference hosted by Summit Core. The room on screen was minimalist. Glass walls, muted lighting, everything designed to look like clarity instead of power. Michael appeared first. He was dressed in a dark navy shirt, sleeves casually rolled to his forearms. His salt and pepper hair was slightly more unkempt than before, like he had skipped sleep rather than meetings. But his eyes were the same, steady, analytical, always calculating 3 moves ahead. "This isn't a recruitment pitch," he said immediately. A pause. "It's a correction." On the side panel, I could see the Summit Core executive board, 4 people watching silently. Among them was Victoria Hale, a sharp-featured woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe knot. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers tapped lightly on the table, betraying tension. She had built half of Summit Core's compliance architecture and trusted very few decisions that weren't her own. Across from her sat Evan Pierce, a younger board member in his late 30s, clean-shaven, energetic, leaning forward like he already wanted to disagree with something. He had a reputation for challenging acquisitions aggressively. The debate had clearly already started before I arrived. "Too risky," Evan said through the speaker. "She's still legally tied to Northbridge." "She's also the reason their client retention collapsed," Victoria replied flatly. "That's not risk, that's leverage." Michael didn't interrupt them. He watched me instead. Finally, the board went quiet. He leaned closer to the camera. "We've been tracking client migration from Northbridge," he said. 3 major accounts have already requested exploratory talks with us." I said nothing. He continued. "They didn't mention the company," he added. "They mentioned you." That landed heavier than expected. Michael closed a folder in front of him. "You're not a person leaving a company, Sophie," he said quietly. "You're the structure they built around without realizing it." A pause. Then he said it, calm, precise. They don't know how to replace a system like you because they never understood it wasn't a system. It was you. Silence filled the call. Even the board stopped moving. Outside my window, New York traffic roared like nothing in my life had changed. But inside that room, something irreversible had already shifted. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't being pulled into chaos. I was being positioned at the center of a new one. I didn't expect Daniel Brooks to come in person. But when I opened my office door that afternoon, he was already standing there. Not in the way I remembered him. Not sharp, not controlled, not untouchable. He looked reduced. His suit was wrinkled, tie slightly loosened, hair no longer perfectly styled. The man who once commanded entire rooms now looked like he had been surviving meetings instead of leading them. Behind him stood Lydia Grant, his former executive assistant. She was in her early 30s, tall, with straight black hair tucked behind her ears, wearing a simple gray coat that made her look more like someone trying to disappear than be noticed. Her eyes avoided mine completely. She didn't speak, but her presence said everything. She was no longer fully on his side. Daniel stepped inside without waiting for permission. That alone told me everything had changed. "You've been busy," he said quietly. I didn't respond. He glanced around my office, minimal, calm, structured, the opposite of what Northbridge had become. "They're leaving," he added, a pause. "Clients, teams, even board members." Still, I said nothing, because I already knew. Northbridge wasn't collapsing suddenly. It was unraveling in layers, each decision he made tightening the knot around it. Then he exhaled. Not like a CEO, like someone tired of holding himself together. "I thought I was protecting the company," he said. "I thought pressure created performance." His eyes met mine for the first time. But I was just managing fear. The admission hung in the air, heavy, late, irreversible. Outside the glass walls, New York moved like nothing mattered. Inside, Daniel looked smaller with every second he spoke. "There's no structure left," he continued. "Evan resigned, 2 board members are gone, even legal is refusing to sign off on new client retention terms." A pause, then softer. "They're asking where you went." That word, "you," carried everything he had lost. I finally spoke. "You didn't lose me," I said calmly. "You removed the part of the system that held everything together." His jaw tightened slightly, but not in anger, in recognition. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded. Then came the sentence I never thought I would hear from him. "I'm sorry," he said. Not strategic, not corporate, just empty honesty. A long silence followed. He looked down like he couldn't sustain eye contact anymore. "I thought control meant leadership," he added. "But I was wrong." When he looked up again, there was no authority left in his expression, only consequence. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just needed you to know that." I studied him for a moment. The man who once fired me on a ski slope now standing in front of me like a version of himself he no longer knew how to lead. But something in me had already moved past him. "I do know," I said quietly. Another pause. Then I added, "But I don't belong there anymore." He nodded once. No argument, no resistance, just acceptance. And then he left. No dramatic exit, no final speech. Just the quiet sound of a man walking out of a system that no longer recognized him. I didn't watch him go, because for the first time, I wasn't part of his story anymore. The first morning I walked into Summit Corps as Vice President of Operational Strategy, I didn't feel powerful. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm finally decides to stop arguing with the sky. My office was on the 41st floor. Glass walls, wide skyline view, minimal design. Everything in it looked intentional, like the company expected clarity from the people who worked there. Waiting inside was Natalie Chen, my new executive assistant. She was in her late 20s, petite, with straight dark hair cut neatly at her jawline and sharp glasses that made her look permanently focused. Natalie spoke softly, but her movements were precise, like someone trained in environments where mistakes were expensive. "I've cleared your schedule for the onboarding week," she said, "but Michael requested you review the Titan Bridge account first." I nodded, no hesitation, no resistance. For the first time, decisions were mine before they became emergencies. The Titan Bridge project was Summit Core's largest pending client transition, a complex integration involving 3 legacy systems and international compliance layers. The team assembled in the conference room was already waiting. Among them was Jordan Miles, a mid-30s systems architect with a shaved head and restless energy. He had a habit of tapping his pen against the table when thinking, like silence made him uncomfortable. Jordan was brilliant but impatient, someone who had burned out of 2 previous startups before landing here. Next to him sat Priya Nair, a calm, soft-spoken data strategist originally from London. She wore simple black sweaters and never raised her voice, even when correcting senior engineers. People listened to her not because she demanded attention, but because she rarely wasted words. They looked at me like I was either a solution or a risk. I preferred both. 3 weeks later, Titan Bridge went live. The rollout didn't just succeed, it stabilized faster than forecast, reducing system latency by 34% and eliminating 2 critical client bottlenecks within the first 72 hours. During the final review call, the client executive leaned closer to the camera. "Whatever you're doing differently," he said, "don't stop." After the call ended, silence filled the room. Not awkward silence, earned silence. Jordan broke it first. "Okay," he said, leaning back. "I officially don't understand how you saw that gap before we did." Priya smiled slightly. "She didn't see it before," she said. "She saw it without noise." That evening, Maya arrived at Summit Core. She looked different outside Aspen, more grounded, more certain. Her curly hair was tied back neatly, and she wore a structured beige coat that made her look sharper than I remembered. But her eyes were the same, observant, unafraid. "You look like you belong here," she said. "I didn't," I replied. She smirked. "Neither did I, that's why I joined you." Michael joined us later on the terrace. He stood beside the glass railing, city lights reflecting faintly in his expression. He didn't look like a CEO in that moment. He looked like someone watching momentum take shape. "We're ahead of projection by 9 months," he said. I didn't react. He glanced at me. "You know what changed?" he asked. I shook my head. "You stopped reacting," he said, "and started deciding." A pause. Then he added, quieter, "That's what leadership actually is." Later that night, I stayed alone in my office. New York stretched endlessly outside the glass, alive, chaotic, indifferent. But for the first time, I wasn't trying to survive it. I was shaping my place inside it. No fear, no permission, no control over me, just choice. And responsibility that finally felt like mine. I exhaled slowly, looking at the skyline. I wasn't the employee who got fired anymore. I wasn't the system they depended on. I was the one building what came next. And I wasn't done yet. So here's the question. If your value is only recognized after you leave, was leaving a mistake or the first real success? Would you stay in a place that controls you or choose freedom even if it costs everything? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.